Today, we're focusing on the very urgent housing justice movement that has been erupting in LA. If you'd like to hear more about how Los Angeles developed its neighborhoods, be sure to check out our recording of our March 30th redlining event, now accessible on our Crossroads site. In this panel, we will hear from community organizers from 4 different organizations who have responded to this housing crisis in their neighborhood and why our different justice movements need to fight for collective well-being. Using tactics such as fighting for tenants' rights, reducing gang violence, resourcing public education, improving housing supply, and reclaiming vacant homes. These Los Angeles and California based groups are building stronger communities and fighting for housing rights from all directions. Um, our speakers are Diana and Lourdes, organizers of Compton Tenants Union, Henry Perez, Associate Director of Inner City Struggle, Marta Escudero and Angela Flores of Reclaiming Our Homes, and Laura Foote, Executive Director of Yes in My Backyard, otherwise known as YIMBY. So I'll pass the virtual mic off to our panelists for a quick intro of the work they do, starting with Diana and Lourdes of Compton Tenants Union.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon to everybody on the call. My name is Deanna. I use she, her pronouns. Born and raised in Compton. This past year, me and some of my comrades, we realized that, that there were some serious issues in Compton that folks were not really addressing. So the pandemic really pushed us to do something and to begin to organize. So yeah, we're really out here just doing things from the bottom up because we really care about our community, and since we care about our community, we got to defend our community.
Hi, my name is Lourdes, and I'm with the Compton Tenants Union. I have been with them for a few months. They are actually the ones, they defended me when they were trying to evict me. And yes, the pandemic has definitely had a huge impact here in the city of Compton. When we call the health department, they just tell me that I have to be patient for any complaints because of the pandemic. There's not much they can do, that everything has been pushed back. Meanwhile, we're here living with a tremendous amount of roaches, black widows. My son was already bitten by a black widow. Very, very painful, slow recovery. He was on crutches. And here we are still exactly this month, 3 years, no hot water.
Thank you so much for your presence here today and for giving us that quick intro. I'll pass it off to Henry Perez, Associate Director of Inner City Struggle.
All right, thank you, Yolanda. And I'm gonna go ahead and share screen just to try to go through a quick PowerPoint. Okay, everyone, so 4 minutes. I gotta go through this really fast, but my name is Henry, and I'm bringing out the timer. So my name is Henry Perez. I'm the Associate Director of Inner City Struggle. ICS, Inner City Struggle, is a 27-year-old organization organizing young people and families in the east side of Los Angeles. We began doing gang intervention work, and then we shifted to doing educational justice work to really transform our public education system to work for our communities. We also do voter engagement, and now we do housing justice. The reason we began doing housing justice work here at Inner City Struggle is because we began to see a shift in our community. And I'll go through like what are some of those shifts that we began to see, but ultimately it ended up leading to the displacement of many community residents from the east side. Many of them that were members of Inner City Struggle that were uprooted from their homes, from their communities, and had to move to further away places in search of a more affordable housing. And in the worst case, members and community residents that became houseless in the community. And that just had a big impact on just their themselves, right? They were just uprooted from their social network. And we just felt that we really had to do something about it. So if you're not familiar with the East Side, it is predominantly an immigrant community. The median household income in the East Side is about $43,000 with a poverty rate of 24%. Low-income working class community from Mexico, Central America, and then also a small but significant Chinese and Japanese community. And it is located just 3 miles from downtown LA, which has a significant impact on us, right? And I'll get into it in a bit. So these are some of the conditions that are impacting housing in our community. One, it's a majority renter population in the East Side. In Boyle Heights in particular, which is one of the communities in the East Side, we have a close to 80% renter population that makes our community a very vulnerable community. It neighbors downtown LA, and all the revitalization that has happened in downtown LA has definitely trickled its way to the East Side, especially Boyle Heights and the communities that are just one bridge away from downtown LA. There is billions of dollars in public and private investments, and there is studies and research that shows when you have an area that has an influx of investments, public and private, and a low-income community, the risk of displacement drastically increases. There's intense gentrification, unaccountable political leadership, and this kind of touches on redistricting that 10 years ago, downtown LA was included into our council district of CD14 because the council member wanted to have downtown Los Angeles in basically his back pocket. And he basically ended up ignoring our communities and really focusing on the developments of downtown LA. Another factor here for us is the presence of a university, of USC, the University of Southern California, which is a dominant force in our community. There is a biotech master plan with USC and the county here in our backyard, which is going to bring thousands of new people into our community, mainly professionals, right, in the biotech industry that threatens to exacerbate displacement in our community. There's a significant part of the East Side that is in unincorporated areas of the county of Los Angeles, which makes it challenging for us as organizers to have to organize in the city context, but also in the county context. One thing that is important in Boyle Heights in particular is that it has one of the largest stock of rent control units in the entire city of Los Angeles, about 16,000. But many of the folks that are occupying rent control units, what are called RSO units, rent stabilization ordinance units, do not even know that they have rent control rights. Lastly, what we're doing about it, we know that this is a complex problem that is gonna take complex strategies. So we have like our 3 pillars of organizing. One is tenant protections, right? Protecting the tenants that are that need protections now. Secondly, pushing for equitable and accountable development with all the money being poured in. We want to make sure that there is no displacement and there's community benefits for the long-term residents of this community. And lastly, preserving and expanding affordable housing in our community, making sure that the affordable housing that does exist does not get, that doesn't go away, replaced with like more market rate housing. And I just want to wrap up by saying that coalition work is really important for us. We house something called the East Side Leads Coalition, which is pushing for a vision of what the East Side should look like in our community. And I'll stop there. I went really fast, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that really quick introduction in 4 minutes, no less. If we can hear from Martha and Angela from Reclaiming Our Homes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm gonna give a little history of Reclaiming Our Homes and how I got about into this movement. So in November of 2019, I saw the story of Moms for Housing, which was really inspiring for me, them being Black moms and having the courage to take on these houses and provide safety for their children inspired me. And I started actively looking for people that wanted to do this in LA. And Angela Flores, who's here as well, she also was looking for similar action. So we touched base and started organizing regarding this. We started meeting in January as a coalition with other organizations, people interested. And I just found out about all these Caltrans homes that have been abandoned for so many years due to a freeway expansion that never happened. And I was outraged because I've been suffering couch surfing with my daughters for so many months, and people have been waiting in years in shelters or on the streets, yet the state was hoarding all these houses while people are suffering. And we ended up doing the first take on March 14th, which is a year now. It's been over a year now. And we really did it for the safety of our children. And it was right when COVID lockdown came in. So it was really convenient for us as well to be able to keep safe during this pandemic. In July, we started negotiating with the city. A lot of these houses got transferred. 22 of these houses got transferred to the city into a program called PATH that assists homeless people. And in October, I was able to move into a new home through this program that has equitable rent. But it doesn't stop there. We want permanent housing. This rent is going to end in 2 years. The contract is for 2 years. And we already started establishing community here, and we would like to move it into the El Sereno Community Land Trust so we could have more accountability for the land that's here, and also be caretakers with the Tumva people and speak to them on how to be real caretakers of this land. We acknowledge, I myself acknowledge I'm an immigrant in this land, and I'm learning about really what it means to be a caretaker of the land and to have that responsibility. So we're looking into what is equality, what is equity, and what is restoration and liberation, which is our end goal, to liberated people. And so, and that is not only people, but all living beings. And so we're looking into being caretakers and just encompassing housing and shelter for all living beings, including our animal and plant relatives. And so this is what we're looking toward as housing. Like, how do we encompass everyone and every living being in it? And another thing we're working on is the homeless count, which is really important because due to COVID, it wasn't done through the city, but also because El Sereno gets lumped into the Skid Row and downtown resources. And we are a unique community that has different needs, and we want to acknowledge what those needs are, and we want politicians to know the needs of this community and be able to advocate for the people in this community and what resources they receive. And also, I wanted to pass it to Angela so she could also give a little more history of why there was all these vacant homes in the first place.
Thank you, Marta. So my name is Angela Flores. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm one of the co-founders and co-facilitators of the Eastside Cafe cultural arts autonomous space inspired by the Zapatista movement, a population of indigenous people who rose up against their government in Chiapas, Mexico, 1994. And I'm also a Caltrans tenant. So my family has been tenants for the past 30 years in the city of South Pasadena. And Caltrans is just this the worst slumlord in all of California because of the many other properties that they own up south and north of California. And I'm also a co-founder and of the Reclaiming Our Homes effort. And so I guess going back when we first rented our home in 1992, we thought it was a great deal. It was renting out a Caltrans home. It was on the border of El Sereno and South Pasadena, a nice neighborhood. And then we just started seeing a lot of corruption. We started seeing some abusive relationships between the landlord and tenants. And around 1994, when the uprising happened, my father went ahead and found his calling to go to Chiapas, Mexico, and to understand better, more in depth of the horizontality that they developed and the strive to decolonize themselves and to show the world how they've been in this process of decolonization. So he went over there. He spent a couple of years there learning and came back and just found out a lot of grievances that our neighbors had, that my mom had, just negligence on Caltrans' part, where they didn't come around, they didn't fix anything, they intimidation tactics where they harassed and evicted people. So while they were doing that, and fast forward to 2017, we're at the Eastside Cafe, we intervened a sale and protested this new buyer. And the buyer actually gave us an opportunity to purchase the building. And we were able to raise enough funds from the larger LA community to outright purchase the building. And we were able to fight that, and at the same time just reverberate this message about displacement and fighting, speaking up, doing direct action. And you're like you gotta do something if you don't want to be displaced. So we did that, and we didn't feel comfortable being landlords, and yet we were challenged with this problem of displacement and gentrification, that we had to create a land trust. And so that is attached with the 501c3. We, we never worked with a nonprofit or wanted to become a nonprofit. I think our purpose as the Eastside Cafe was also understanding how can we tap into our resources ourselves and become interdependent and empower one another. But in this day and age, the economy doesn't allow for all people to do that. So we went ahead and we thought, let's do a land trust and see how we can transfer um, um, these properties over onto the hands of the people. And at the same time, as we're fighting for horizontality and self-determination at the local level, we're also fighting this big monster slumlord, Caltrans, and their exploitation of property off of so many tenants. On top of everything, what they had planned to do was depopulate the corridor. And so Caltrans, and sorry, I'm just gonna go back a little. Caltrans in the 60s bought properties in three cities, El Sereno, South Pasadena, and Pasadena, to extend the 710 freeway to the 210 Pasadena freeway. And in that time, when they were planning, they were renting out these homes. And then the plans kept delaying and delaying. And as they were as time went on, they were slumlords. They didn't know how to take care of housing. They really had no business being landlords and meeting people's needs. So they just ended up being very abusive to a lot of the tenants. So what had happened was a lot of tenants had been witness, including ourselves, to a lot of our neighbors being kicked out, and and then even tenants who have passed away with no housing justice. So what we had to do is, we felt very desperate because we didn't feel like no one was hearing our cries, no one was hearing us speak up, and especially like with Jose, we saw, like Henry was saying, he was someone who just didn't pay attention, did not want to hold anyone accountable, and still to this day, Caltrans is not held accountable. I think that with the actions that we took with reclaiming our homes, it definitely shook things up, and it made people think, it made people wake up, and it jolted the community, good and bad. And there's a lot of people who are in support and who love us and who are willing to partner with us. And there's a lot of people who have been very hostile, and that's just the reality that we're facing. But we have to make sure that we're looking out for those who are houseless and vulnerable right now. So, like Marta was saying, this is a goal for restoration and liberation in the long run.
Thank you so much, Marta and Angela. So our last but not least, if we can hear from Laura Foote, Executive Director of YIMBY.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to highlight, the personal stories, especially that we have heard already, really help ground and contextualize some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, because what I'm going to talk about is a little bit more focused on kind of like big picture focus on sort of the like forces that are happening in the larger economy. And it's really important to understand that in order to understand the impact that those have, we have to hear the personal stories of people who are on the ground and where it is affecting them, and especially the in-community solutions that are going to need to be like key parts of the problem, parts of the solution rather. I am going to share my screen. Henry, you've given me the boldness to do some slides, so I'm going to do it. I was thinking like, slides, but no, you did a good job. So one of the big things that the YIMBY movement overall focuses on is, especially on a national level as well as on regional levels, we have this overall lack of enough housing in jobs-rich areas. And so we have jobs and opportunity. We have people who want to move and get those jobs. We have just a lot of demand in those areas, and that is causing prices to go higher and higher and putting a huge amount of pressure on existing communities. California overall is 49th in the nation in housing production, which is crazy because our economy has been booming for a really long time. And across California, we're just systematically not building enough housing. Overall, we have a lot of places, especially places with a lot of jobs growth. So I'm in San Francisco. This is our neighborhood. We have a lot of housing. We have a lot of jobs in the San Francisco Bay Area, and just chronically not building enough of any kind of housing. There's sort of different ways that you can think about what are all of the on the ground personal impacts of this chronic shortage, especially not building in the wealthiest communities. So Cupertino is where Apple headquarters is, and it's about 95% zoned single family home only. It's illegal to build subsidized affordable housing. It's illegal to build multifamily apartments. And they have one of the highest performing school districts in the nation. They have a huge amount of jobs and opportunity there. And the city does not want to allow more housing, does not want to allow people who are different than the existing community to be able to move in. And there's a lot of, I'm going to talk a bit more about like race and class and how that gets tied into why they are blocking that housing. But it's sort of important to then think about when you have all of these different communities across the country, and especially the ones who are opportunity hoarding and wealth hoarding, those are the communities that have systemically blocked all kinds of housing coming into their communities. And so you get this pressure on people, on individuals, and on low-income communities. That pressure that's pushing down on people, that's pushing more people into homelessness, that's pushing more people into mega commuting, where they have to drive for hours and hours in order to be able to afford housing that is really far from the jobs and opportunities, causing traffic to go up. This pressure that is being pushed, and especially on, we know that when this kind of pressure is applied, it falls disproportionately on low-income people and people of color. And I think it's like, hopefully it's not like breaking news. Like, people are spending too much on housing, right? Like, I know my rent's too high. What I think is kind of incredible is to realize that this is across the entire United States. People are spending too much on housing. And then you get these crisis places where it's especially acute. So across the entire United States, we see all these statistics that people are spending more than 30% is generally what the stats people like to say you should be spending. Personally, I'm like, let's get it down to 25%, but people should be spending no more than 30% of their income on housing. And we know that that is just not what people are doing. People are spending way more than that on housing. And additionally, they're engaging in mega commuting, all kinds of other signs of this overall shortage. And we know that that is having a way disproportionate impact on lower income people. I don't have time right now, but I think it's really important to also think about the ways in which America has invested in white wealth through home ownership. And I just want, like, if you want to read more about that, The Color of Law is one of the biggest, best books on that, but there's a lot of reading you can do. Also means that while it has a disproportionate impact on people, on lower income people, it also has a disproportionate impact, therefore, on people of color who, because of racist laws over our long history, have not accumulated as much family wealth. And I wish I could go more into that, but I'm trying to keep it fast for you guys. Accounting for housing costs, California has the nation's highest poverty rate. It's a huge barrier to joining the middle class. It's causing more homelessness. And it's really important to understand that this is really also a policy problem. We know how to build housing. We have a lot of people who want to live in it. We have a lot of parking lots, and we have a lot of places where we could be building housing. And it's not millennials complaining. Every once in a while, you will see somebody being like, oh, young people, they just complain too much. Like, no, we are living in an unusual time in history. This is an injustice that is being done. I'm going to skip this one. So one thing that I think is really important is to understand that housing of all types, we have a lot of different kinds of housing. So we have subsidized affordable housing. We also have these things called accessory dwelling units. They're little backyard cottages. We also have all these different kinds of funding mechanisms for housing. Like, you can get really wonky on the different types of housing, but new housing, whether it's subsidized affordable or whether it's market rate, is blocked by zoning laws and is also blocked by complicated permitting systems. And especially when you think about zoning and permitting, it's the wealthiest neighborhoods, the wealthiest communities that have the most process that block building new housing in that neighborhood. So it's really important when you're thinking about what's happening in the lowest income communities where you're seeing the most displacement, to also look at the wealthiest neighborhood next door. what is that neighborhood doing or really not doing to alleviate the displacement crisis that is happening in the low-income community that is getting so much pressure put onto it? If you look, and LA is a great example of, there are so many super wealthy neighborhoods that are not building housing. There are so many super wealthy, job-rich areas that are not allowing subsidized affordable housing, that are not allowing new apartment buildings of any kind, and that use both the process of permitting that housing to stall, to make a lot of what sound perfectly reasonable, but are really based in fear of people who are different than them coming into the neighborhood, coming into their school districts. There's a lot of the history of this low density zoning that is about how we used to have explicitly racist laws that said Black people cannot move into this neighborhood, brown people cannot move into this neighborhood. And as we rolled back those explicitly racist laws, neighborhoods didn't wake up the next day and be like, oh, you know what I want to do? Integrate my schools. That sounds great. No, these neighborhoods were full of people who did not want people who were different than them coming into their community. And so they came up with implicitly racist housing policies to keep people who were different from them from being able to access the resources and opportunities in their neighborhoods. And so they came up with zoning and permitting processes that kept that demand from coming into their neighborhood. I'm going to try to go faster, sorry. And so it's important to say, especially in the wealthiest neighborhoods, we need a lot more market rate housing. It's one of the things that we're fighting for. It's important to understand that we're going to need a lot of tenants protections and a lot of the nuance that the first speakers were speaking to. It's really important to incorporate and listen to those communities about what the specific challenges that the at risk of displacement neighborhoods are talking about, and their on the ground knowledge is key to solving this overall structural problem. It's also really important to make sure that in the wealthiest communities, we're asking more of them. To those that have a lot, we're going to ask a lot more. I'm going to end it there.
Thank you so much. And it's incredible how much we just learned just from the introductions here. I definitely agree with you, Laura, on how hearing the lived experiences from the folks on the ground right now, being affected by a lot of this history, a lot of this these policies, and just like thank you so much, Henry and Laura, for kind of contextualizing a lot of that on a city level and on a state level. So thank you so much for that. And so without further ado, we'll get started on the questions. Um, so the first questions are what interconnections do you see between housing injustice, environmental racism, and policing? And have you worked on actions that demonstrate these intersections? If we can hear from folks from Reclaiming Our Homes for this question.
Okay. So, for me personally, the housing injustices that I mentioned before is that a lot of the tenants don't get to see their housing justice, and they don't get to, um, you know, they're not able to purchase their home just yet. Um, in 2017, the Board of Metro had voted unanimously to close all plans for the 710 freeway, and that would allow for the tenants to purchase their home at the original price that Caltrans had first bought them for. So you had these tenants throughout decades who had been in their homes, terrified of their land, the repercussions of a freeway, and people within the community. We've seen what that does to communities. In all of Northeast LA, there's a freeway that families get torn apart. Families are pushed and displaced, and now it's a matter of increased housing prices. So the interconnectedness with housing justice, environmental racism, and policing um, has to do, well, for me personalized policing ourselves. And a lot
Angela, I think you're breaking up on us a little bit. Maybe if
brutality.
you turn off your camera, I think that helps sometimes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying was that I feel a lot of times nowadays we're conditioned, a lot of people don't have the resources or education to understand what decolonization is, decolonizing methodologies, self-determination at the local level, and it's a lot of people don't have a clue, and they're so used to the fact on casting judgment onto houseless people and people who are insecure, including ourselves, and that we internalize ideals, those elitist, classist, very racist ideals, and so I see that interconnectedness one, and then as well as just very recently we had the take in March of 2020, and then we had a second take in November. The first one was successful as a coalition, and the second one was more autonomous. It was a more autonomous effort without any nonprofits, and that wasn't so successful. We saw a lot of more policing. We saw a lot of the threat of brutality. Um, we were on the front lines of police brutality and the pandemic, and um, we had to we had to face that. We had to face that. Maybe just days, weeks after the police protected these properties and um, put more value in empty houses than the houseless people, than houseless families. And it's discouraging, it's disheartening. However, I think that we need to continuously expose, and what happened with Echo Park was very similar in that they were evicting and raiding these areas, and saw parallels to Chavez Ravine, where people were physically forcibly moved from their homes. So I see a lot of that interconnectedness with that.
Thank you, Angela. And if we can hear from Yimbi next, Laura.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's one thing that I think is really important about all these interconnected is to think about it in the context of a pre-segregated society and opportunity hoarding are these two really important concepts, I think. So we've got this pre-segregated society where we have people who live in one place and other people live in another place. And the police officers are almost always not living in the communities that they serve. They are commuting in and do not build social ties and do not understand the community that they are supposedly serving with any kind of depth or and there are a lot of like workarounds that are then attempted to be built between the community and the police, but there's kind of no substitute for actually living in the community and understanding what's happening there. And then you sort of have to understand with environmental racism that especially over the past 20 years, because we have been blocking housing in the wealthiest neighborhoods, in the neighborhoods with the most opportunity, we've also then been building in the neighborhoods with the least political resistance. And sometimes that means low income communities, and sometimes that means literal toxic waste dumps that it's easier to build apartments and affordable housing near highways and places where people are going to get a lot more, and that's where this like term of environmental racism, a lot of it is tied up in this idea that we're going to make it acceptable to build houses in places where people are going to actually be at risk of other kinds of damage to their person. All of this is sort of tied up in why are we not allowing housing in places with high performing school districts, in places of a lot of opportunity? Why are we forcing everyone who is lower income to live in sectioned off places of our cities? And Henry, I'm sorry, I don't know. Is it okay if I call on him?
Thank you, Laura. Real quick, Yolanda, to this point, definitely policing and housing justice is definitely linked, interconnected, not just with public police departments. And, when you have new neighbors coming into a community, gentrifying communities tend to be more policed, right? Over policed, right? New neighbors that call police on long-term residents, for various reasons that wasn't happening before. But also you have private entities with police forces. So I just want to lift up here. We're part of another coalition called USC Forward, and we're calling out USC's police force because of just the way that they have been treating the surrounding communities of where their campuses are at in South LA, as well as in Boyle Heights, East LA. And we know that they hire former LAPD officers, Los Angeles Police Department officers, with shady track records. So we just recently signed on to a letter calling for an investigation on that. And that's happening because of all the investments being poured into this community and those self-interests that they're like trying to protect at the expense of the long-term residents and community. And lastly, I'll say that in our East Side Leads vision, the 14-point vision, one of the points is to not criminalize young people and young people of color. Or people of color in general, that instead let's invest in youth development programs instead of the criminalization of young people in our community.
Thank you so much, Henry, for that. I also want to get some consent that we might have to go overtime for today's event from all of our panelists, so we can do 15 minutes more. I can just like get a show of hands. Awesome. Okay. So our next question is in March of 2020, the global pandemic found its way to our doorstep. Since then, we've seen an exacerbation of many pre-existing housing crises. What are some of the ways that the current COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your housing struggle? And how has your organization responded to these emerging issues? So I want to call on CTU folks on for this one.
Well, before answering this question, I do want to answer the last question, just add to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Definitely, I'm in agreement that, housing, the environment, and policing, all these systems are interconnected. In Compton, one thing that we've seen with the environment and housing is that in the past year, we've had 3 like major environmental catastrophes in the city, 2 major fires, and then a chemical spill. And all of these events are happening in industrial and manufacturing sites, right? But also sites that literally border homes in residential areas. Like these places are literally in our backyards. And I was just doing a quick Google search, and one of the biggest the World Oil, it's just a massive oil company, right? And they have their biggest site in Compton. It's the biggest world oil site in the world, and it's in Compton. and it's a $1 billion company, and just it just happens to be that the owner, one of the owners of the company, he's a graduate from Dartmouth. So I thought that was funny. It's funny how things come full circle. But in talking about like these private police forces, right? Um, these chemical spills, they affect, of course, our housed and unhoused tenants in Compton, because when we had this chemical spill in Compton last summer, um, we were hearing like, stay indoors, close your windows. Our unhoused neighbors, they can't do that. They are literally on the front lines of this environmental struggle. Um, and I would argue that our unhoused neighbors in Compton are literally the most policed people in the city, because they face policing from the sheriffs. Then we've got the school police. The school police is literally evicting them and making them leave sites. Then we have the some sort of federal police force that polices the corridor that runs through Compton. Um, and then we have gangs, right? That's a reality. Like, the gangs are also policing where our unhoused neighbors can and can't be. Um, so yeah, these things are definitely connected.
Thank you so much, Diana, for incorporating that specific experience in Compton. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about like how the pandemic has like maybe exacerbated some of that stuff, some of the experiences there in Compton?
Yeah, so the Compton Tenants Union, we formed during the pandemic. Um, so one of our members had already been in contact with um, a group of tenants who live near Compton High School. So Compton High School, I think it's the oldest high school in Compton, and they're gonna undergo a massive, like, multi-million dollar redevelopment, right? I'm a graduate of Compton High School. It's 100% needed. Like, the infrastructure is terrible, and I'm sure it's not safe. So we need to redevelop this school, right? But in the process, the school is expanding. They bought up land, homes, a church, a car wash. So folks are gonna get displaced. The school district was very much shady within this entire process, and this happened about a year and a half before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, they came to an agreement that um, there would be um, what's the word, a relocation plan, right? They were going to give folks money to move and find new housing. So that was in place, and then they had to leave. I think it was a date in April, right? This is right in the middle of the pandemic. Folks are getting sick. There's little to no ICU beds. Folks were having issues finding available testing sites. So at that same time, the district was still sending out eviction notices. At the same time, we had an eviction moratorium in the county. Um, so that's really when the Compton Tenants Union formed, because we saw that, like, the district was being shady. They were going to evict these tenants in the middle of a pandemic, because people didn't know, people weren't paying attention. Um, um, and when listening to folks talk about what's going on in El Sereno with Caltrans being a landlord, that really reminds me of what's going on in Compton. Because, like, you don't think of these entities as landlords, right? Like, what business do they have being a landlord? What business does anybody have being a landlord, actually? Um, but yeah, they were treating tenants terribly. They're a slumlord. They don't have any experience or business doing this, because this is not what they do. Um, so that was the first thing that really pushed us into action. And then since then, we've engaged in a lot of mutual aid work, right? Because the government is not fulfilling the needs of the people, and our employers aren't either, right? So that has been a really, really big part of our work so far, especially with our unhoused neighbors, providing folks with warm clothes, cold water, and things like that, because the way the city of Compton moves, it's so sketchy, so shady, and there's just a need, and that's really why we do what we do.
Thank you so much. I think I'll call on Henry for this one too.
Yeah, a statement that has been said over and over again, and it's worth repeating, is that the pandemic did not cause the various disparities, racial and economic disparities that we have in our society, but it definitely revealed them, right? It kind of like revealed them, it magnified them even more. Yeah, we have a lot of people in our community struggling, just like everywhere throughout California, Los Angeles, and the country, right? And it has really necessitated a multi-dimensional approach from our end in how do we support them, right? Like Laura was mentioning about so many people being rent burdened, right? And when you're rent burdened, when you pay over 30% of your income to rent, while in the East Side, 30% pay half of their income to rent, right? So we have a very vulnerable community, and like I mentioned in the beginning, especially when it's like an 80% renter community, right? It's very vulnerable. One of the immediate things we had to do is start distributing rapid relief aid. And with the support of many foundations, right, that were able to give us money so that we can then distribute it out into the community. So far, we've given out about $500,000 in rapid relief funds in the East Side. A lot of them being like cash assistance, cash cards of like $500, $700. Sometimes it's less, 200, 300, but we've just been distributing a lot of rapid relief, as well as technology for our young people to be able to stay connected with their schools and hotspots and headphones and all that for the education side of the pandemic, right? But that in itself is not enough. We have to also organize. We also have to be in coalition with other organizations across the city and the county so that we can work at the policy level and calling for the eviction moratoriums, not just in in the city, in the county of Los Angeles, and throughout the state. Calling not just for eviction moratoriums, but a rent assistance, right? And now we're seeing that rent assistance isn't even enough because there's some landlords that do not want to accept the rent assistance, right? They don't want to accept the rent assistance because once the eviction moratorium is lifted on June 30th, if the tenants are not able to pay up, then they can evict that tenant and bring in a higher paying tenant, right? A tenant that will pay a higher rent as soon as that a unit becomes vacant, right? Then the rent control stops, right? Because there is no vacancy rent control, then they'll be able to increase it. So right now we're organizing around canceling rent and canceling mortgage, because we also know that it's not just renters, but it's also our small landlords that are being impacted as well, right? So we are now fighting on that front with the Healthy LA Coalition, and probably like a lot more, but just to wrap it up, that's what I'll share. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I recognize that we're at the ending mark and we have that 15-minute buffer at the end that we consented to. So I do have this one last question, talking a little bit about something that Angela was mentioning earlier, about what happened in Echo Park. So at the start of this event series, around March 30th, we saw a homeless encampment at Echo Park be met with 400 plus police officers in riot gear, ready to fence up, corner, and arrest the communities living at the park, and those protecting its transient residents under the order to sweep and clean up the park. So the total estimated payroll for the 3 days and nights of the sweep was an estimated $887,772.69, not including cost of equipment, helicopter use, or other departments involved with those numbers. So action like these sweeps are unfortunately not uncommon, as some of our panelists can attest. So our next question is, with these numbers alone, what type of initiatives do you think would be possible if your organization was granted the funding? And the funding would be that 887,000 figure. If we can hear, well, rather, who wants to talk on this? Any takers?
I can talk a bit on this. So when we became aware of the Echo Park sweep, we also started, that's when we really started the homeless count, because we wanted to prepare our community and unhoused neighbors in case this happened to El Sereno. They are currently housing them in hotels, and we wanted to make sure that everyone was given that opportunity, and if they wanted to take it, they will be able to take it. One thing that we saw after the attempted take in November is that there was a lot of police and security guarding these vacant homes for months after, and they still are guarding, but now with less presence. There's a lot of resources that are utilized by the state to guard empty homes while there's people on the streets. And what one of the things that we could do with that money or in that funding is to actually really repair these homes, that some have minor repairs, some a little more, and be able to repair these homes immediately and have them available for community. We broke the law by reclaiming these homes, and we did so because, as many of the panelists have said, the county is not working fast enough for us. And so to me, COVID is not killing us. It's the state that's killing us. It's capitalism that's killing us. And the disregard for life and humanity is really what has been killing us, specifically low-income people and people of color, and the most vulnerable people that are unable to pay these high rents. A lot of it, people with different abilities or mental health issues, and we believe housing as a human right, and it should be for everybody, regardless of income. And so I just want to really, and I got this new home through the city in October, and let me tell you that the repairs are not good. They just pretty much, I don't know who got the funding to do these repairs, but they're not adequate, and my house is falling apart. And I feel there's theft going on in all this, because we all know it's happening throughout different government, that they're pocketing the money for other things and not really providing what is healthy and sufficient for these communities. So that's one thing as well, that we could use that funding to really repair these houses that are vacant and abandoned, these lots that could be available for community and be able to house a lot more people than the state is.
Yeah, just to quickly echo, there are over 200 abandoned homes up and along the 710 defunct 710 corridor, and in El Sereno 90, just in one street in El Sereno. And I think that those funds would be beneficial to the entire community and to rebuilding, when we put those funds into rehabilitation and to preserving and restoring, and it's a way of preserving our culture as well. I'd also just add, like, us as an autonomous space, when people talk about community control, that's who we are. That's what we've been doing. That's pretty much our value systems, to be interdependent and to really tap into the power that we have within ourselves and to provide. So within the pandemic, just very quickly on the pandemic, we had to think quick about people who were on the corridor, who are tenants, who are people in their 80s and 90s, who were struggling to have access to food. And in this particular area of El Sereno, it's a food desert. There's no access to quality food, produce, prepackaged meals, nothing. So Marta went ahead and started working on a mutual aid project, and then soon became a food distribution at the Eastside Cafe. We're launching a community fridge, and then soon we're gonna have a farmers market that the Land Trust is pushing for. So it's really important to have these the accessibility to food, but also it's a way of reconnecting to the land and being able to have that connection to the original peoples. Um, um, uh, yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, Henry, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, Yolanda. If I could just say, for me, it's the eviction crisis, right? What folks are calling like the eviction cliff, the eviction tsunami that is in front of us. If we don't take a hold of the rent debt that has been accumulated. I feel like Laura is the researcher here, but I think I read a study from out of UCLA that that there's about, I don't know, is it like 600,000 tenants across California that are at risk of being evicted once the eviction moratoriums are lifted. That's huge. So I would definitely put the money to commandeering the rent debt forgiveness.
I'll disagree just to make it controversial. I'm definitely a believer in housing first. And how much money are you offering us again in this imaginary scenario?
Oh yes, that 88 wait, 8,800, wait, 887,000. There you go. That's the one.
Okay, so I'm gonna need a few billions actually. So I'm not sure what I'll do with your money, but we need billions, in fact, to actually address the need for safe, affordable housing. And a lot of the solutions that we're talking about, and they're important because like people are living in the communities, they need to deal with the reality that we have right now. And I think we need to give that a lot of respect of what is an emergency situation. Okay, we're gonna take an existing vacant house and make it habitable and get people who are in desperate need in that housing right now. We also have to make sure that we are simultaneously thinking as big as we need to be thinking, which is we need billions more to be spent on long-term subsidized affordable housing. That means that we need to be building a lot more new subsidized affordable housing. It also means we need to rehab and make sure that the existing subsidized affordable housing is not crumbling around people. All of that is going to take a huge amount of political will. It's very exciting, actually, that the Biden administration is talking about affordable housing as infrastructure and is building it into their infrastructure plan. I'm feeling a lot more hopeful than I was a few years ago about the opportunity to really do a lot more federal and also local investment in subsidized affordable housing. It's also important, to Martha's point, about where money gets wasted. There's a huge amount of where money gets wasted in the arguing about whether or not you're actually going to build it. And especially that's true of subsidized affordable housing in high income communities. The higher the density of retired lawyers living in that community, the slower you're going to be trying to get that affordable housing especially built. There are so many obstacles that are a lot based in fear that get put up in front of that housing that drive up the cost of the solution we know that works for stabilizing people, which is building subsidized affordable housing. I will end my rant there, but billions, please, is what we actually need.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do here with this question is like really show what we would do with this money. This money wasted on a really ineffective sweep, right? That happened over 3 days, not accounting for all the other parts of the whole that happened in those 3 days. And so it's really like a show of like what we can really do with that to fund the work that y'all are doing and looking into and you know yeah, just like this stuff gets done even without that funding, and just like imagine if it was invested in. Yeah. So that was my last question. And we made it with 4 minutes to spare with our additional buffer. If our panelists want to ask each other any questions, if you have any questions for each other, or if our audience wants to ask any questions, I'm happy to open the floor up.
I've got something if nobody else does. Or Lourdes, do you want to go?
Yes. Going back to that funding, I think that there should be like a funding, a budget or a program where there's like for emergency cases, where there's an absolute dire need for immediate help. Let's say not having hot water, and where there's a disabled child who has muscular dystrophy level 3, which makes it more rare, more severe. So it's having a huge impact on her recovery. Let's say the child is on chemo. I think that that money should also be allocated for very extreme cases. Like for example, my case, where the landlord is just refusing. He's saying he pretty much told the health department that his attorney would take care of me. And meanwhile, he's inflicting pain and suffering on my children, especially the disabled child. So I think that there should also be like money allocated for extreme cases. We don't have running water in the restroom. We don't have light. Our electricity, actually, one of our light bulbs caught on fire, and we had to like turn it off with t-shirts and just start pouring water. I contacted the fire department, and they tried contacting the landlord, and of course he just gets away with it that he doesn't pick up his phone call. His voicemail is full. So what happens in our case? There's a child who's in dire need of hot water for her recovery, and we need water running in the restroom. We need our electricity. We use little lamps that we connect on the outlets, but only 2 outlets are working. What happens if those 2 outlets go out? We're here in the dark.
And the truth is, nobody here has a good answer for you. Like, society has not created a situation where there are emergency programs. I think, I don't know, I'm not in LA, but I know we could probably think through. There's a lot of really smart people here who might know of some emergency programs. But the other truth is that most of our tenants protections are based around the ability for somebody to spend a lot of time doing a lot of paperwork, to hire a lawyer who can help them fight over a long term. And when you've got tenants who are fighting in emergency situations and the situation is this bad, we just don't have laws that are strict enough that actually punish landlords for this kind of behavior. And I just want to acknowledge your pain. And I'm so sorry that that is what you're going through right now. I don't have words.
Like, he deliberately gave us a $200 rent increase because I was born and raised in this compound, which is, I'm 39 years old. I've lived here exactly 39 years old. My mom rented here for 44 years this year. And so his tactic for evicting us was raising us giving a steep rent increase of $200, which is illegal. That is theft. And I wish there was something where this man could be charged for theft. And yes, he's not physically touching us, but he is abusing us and he is inflicting pain over us, because when we have to take showers with cold water, it shocks our body. And I hope there's charges. I wish I could just go to the police department and say, hey, he committed theft. It's not a store where, you know, he took a garment, but hey, this is stolen money. And he did it deliberately because he informed some other neighbors I used to live here. He made it known that that was going to be his tactic. That's how we found out we were going to have those rent increases before we even received them. So I do believe that landlords should be punished strongly.
Yeah, thank you, Lourdes, for that and letting us know about your experience. And if there's anything that's going around, like any crowdfunding, let us know. We'll send it around our networks and everything. But yeah, thank you so much for that, and thank you for being here and giving us time and some of your presence. We really appreciate you coming here and speaking to us. Um, any other questions or things to share? Much love. Yes, much love. All right, I think that is the end of our panel discussion. Thank you so much for coming here, giving us giving us your time, giving us that extra 15 minutes of the buffer. Like, I know it was a lot of us today, but just incredible energy and incredible work that y'all are doing. And we wanted to make sure we highlight some of that in through our series. Um, for folks still tuning in, we'll send around more action items and make sure that you hear how to take action on some of the things. If you want to learn more about how LA created its housing structure as it is, tune in to our recording of the redlining uh, lecture from Professor Michael Lenz to learn a little bit more about that. But thank you so much for everyone who came out today and gave us such amazing attention today.
Great. Thank you all. Appreciate you all.